My name is Heather, and in this session, I'd like to share some of my own explorations and experiences practicing self compassion. And as well, I really want to invite you to have a taste of some of these practices so that you have a chance to try some self compassion out for yourself as well. But I thought before I launch into all of that, we all have an opportunity to fully arrive. So I thought we might drop into just a very short practice of arriving. And so perhaps starting by wiggling yourself into a comfortable sitting position. And if it feels right for you, allowing the eyes to close or just a soft downward gaze. And then noticing the contact the body's making with the seat. So feeling the contact of the sit bones and back of the thighs. And the contact that the feet are making with the floor. And also feeling into the upper torso, perhaps some sense of upliftment here in the upper body. And then finding the sensations of breath in the body. So that may be the sensations of inhaling and exhaling in the belly, or the movement of the chest, or the air through the nostrils. And as best you can, focusing the attention on the inhalation and the exhalation. Just riding that natural rhythm of the breath in and out. And now expanding your attention again to take in the whole body. The whole body sitting here breathing. And then when you're feeling ready, and there's certainly no hurry, just allowing those eyes to open again. So hopefully we're all feeling a little more grounded from that. I know I am. So as I say, tonight's topic, the science of self-compassion. Many of you may already have a self-compassion practice. And so you may have come tonight to learn and practice a bit more. Or maybe like me in my early days with self-compassion, you were kind of curious, but with a really good dose of skepticism about it all. So I really want to welcome all the reasons you may be here this evening. And the reason I've titled this session The Science of Self Compassion is because it was really the science that drew me in. I don't think I really would have considered exploring self compassion without understanding that there was some scientific evidence to the outcomes. And I had all these ideas, of course, about self compassion, and I judged it as too soppy and too self indulgent. And I really didn't see at that stage any point for it in my life. Yet today, self compassion is one of my core practices. And uh, there's just no question I'm more resilient because of it. And I take a lot more risks in my life. And I'm definitely kinder, and not just to myself, because of my self compassion practice. So I've benefited greatly and a bit of an evangelist around this area now, although cautious evangelist still. So, I, like many of you, I'm guessing, started meditation because of some perhaps stress in your life or a change you wanted to bring about in your life. For me, it was a very, very busy mind, a busy life. And as a result of that, really mounting anxiety. And I wanted some relief. And my meditation and my mindfulness practice definitely gave me that. But what my meditation practice also allowed me to really clearly see was this strongly held belief that somehow I needed to be fixed, that I just wasn't good enough the way I was. And I could see clearly in my practice how I was bringing this attitude and belief about myself right into my practice. And the different ways I noticed that showing up was, for example, when my mind would wander, which of course it's the nature of our minds to do that, would wander away from the breath. I kind of forcefully yank it back with this attitude of real frustration and disappointment with myself. And I also noticed this feeling of kind of bearing down on myself as if I was forcing my attention into my breath. And again, this really unhelpful kind of way of relating to myself, kind of striving and pushing myself into something. It was really anything but easeful. So, in other words, in my meditation practice, I discovered my rather unfriendly relationship with myself. As I say, one that was anything but warm or encouraging or supportive, which opened me up to realizing that perhaps I did need to consider another way of being with myself. But still, I knew about self compassion, but still, I had this sense of it was a bit kind of self indulgent. So, what really turned me around was I listened to a talk. I had the opportunity to listen to a talk by Dr. Christian Neff. You may have heard of her. She's one of the leading researchers in this field of self compassion. And she was talking about research that shows that many people, like myself, resist self compassion because there's this belief that being compassionate towards ourselves is going to make us, more self centered, more sort of egocentric. And we'll become more self indulgent or maybe even lose our edge in some way, kind of become weak. So if we are easy on ourselves after a setback, we can believe, well, I'm going to turn soft or complacent. And I have to admit, I was kind of relating to self compassion in this way as well. But what she talked about really surprised me when it came to the research. And she pointed out that all of the research that she was aware of showed that this just wasn't true. These notions of becoming soft or self indulgent or egocentric. In fact, it's just the opposite with self compassion. So, what she meant by that was that their research is showing that self compassion can lead to greater success, however we define that in our lives, and we all have a different definition of success. It can lead to greater personal change, especially up against the alternative, which in my situation was all this negative self talk and this really unhealthy kind of striving and pushing myself through life. So, self compassion is a source of both personal and interpersonal strength. And I really, I took that in intellectually and wanted to believe that. But truly, it was only in my own direct experience of these practices that I have come to know it as a very strong practice and not an easy practice, I have to say, like many of our practices that shift us in some significant way. So, self compassion helps us become more emotionally stable, which always allows for our better self to appear, allows us to be more responsive rather than reactive, and more motivated to, in fact, develop ourselves when we're more compassionate with ourselves. And generally, we're just a lot nicer to be around when we are more compassionate with ourselves, because this also turns outwards to others. So, what really resonated with me is that with self compassion, our motivation for change is because we deeply care about ourselves, not because we think in some way we're missing something, we're lacking, or we're worthless, unacceptable, kind of the way we are, which was very much the way I was feeling, this sense of something just wasn't right, something had to change, this notion of improvement and the self improvement versus self development. So I love that self compassion comes from this motivation of care for ourselves, deep care, rather than this idea that we need to fix ourselves. So over time, I've really come to appreciate also that self compassion creates a foundation of safety, I would call it, this kind of safety that I need to really look at the hard stuff that I don't want to see about myself in the way I behave and the way I can react often and support myself through that change. Because my experience with mindfulness is that certainly it has grown my self-awareness tremendously, but in growing my self-awareness, there's often a lot I really don't enjoy seeing. And so with the combination of the self-awareness and the compassion, so the ability to, be kind to myself when I'm also looking at the hard parts, I've been able to, it feels to me anyways, I've been able to shift and change a little more easily with the self-compassion. So I'll give you a really specific example about this. I have hair trigger blaming reactivity. So I can fly into blaming very, very readily. And what I've come to understand about that in myself is that I am highly, highly sensitive to criticism. So I can really easily feel criticized, even when the person is coming from this completely different place. So my partner may simply point out to me another perspective on a story I might be telling, and I can feel hurt. I can feel criticized, judged in some way, even though that's typically not where the intention is coming from. It's just this sensitivity I seem to have. And in that hurt, I notice all my past kind of hurts around this show up, and they kind of reinforce that hurt that's going on in the present moment. So my reactions when I do feel criticized really hit me quite deeply, more than really any kind of single present moment situation would warrant. And it's all about, avoiding feeling the pain of that emotional reaction I'm having. So I immediately move into this defensive strategy of blaming. So in the instance of my partner, just blaming him for however he has responded to me in the telling of my story, and kind of self-justifying my own position in that, getting really kind of hardened and stubborn around that. And as you can imagine, unfortunately, an argument can typically kind of follow on from that. So I've come to know that I defend so that I don't have to feel the pain of the kind of unworthiness or rejection that the perceived criticism sets off in me. And we all know that our mindfulness practice is an antidote to our strong emotions, in particular the emotions that are very unpleasant. So our mindfulness practice for me is the antidote to blame, or as I say, to really any painful emotion. And the antidote in our mindfulness practice, very specifically, as we've learned, is to directly feel the pain that I'm trying to avoid, which of course isn't the mental process and the storytelling of that. It's about physically coming into the body and embodying whatever that hurt or that pain might be as its physical reality. Excuse me. As its physical sensation in the body. And staying with those physical sensations of hurt or stress or anxiety or sadness or loss or whatever they might be. So often when I do this, when I can feel that pain from feeling criticized and that reactivity of blaming, and I can find my way into my body and just feel the physical sensations of that pain. Typically, it's quite a heavy feeling in my belly and kind of hollowness in my chest and a real ache in my heart. And when I can stay with that mindfully, I can really stay with my suffering. And what I notice, and you notice this too in your practice of just experiencing pain in its physical form in our body, is that the suffering somehow becomes a little more porous, kind of loosens up a little bit. And it often feels to me like the energy of life can kind of flow more naturally through me. And I also found that in those moments when I'm allowing some spaciousness and feeling into that physical pain, if I can also offer myself some self-compassion in that moment, that I don't feel quite so alone in it. And in my instance, it's a little easier to unhook from that reactive pattern of lashing out and blaming right away, falling into my defensive strategy of blame. And I'm going to share with you in a moment how I do this, the practice itself, and give you a chance to experience it. However, I wanted to really emphasize at this point that when I'm offering myself the self compassion, it's not to make the hurt feelings go away. And of course, a part of me wants that. There's no denying it. But the intention is not necessarily to make these hurt feelings disappear any sooner than they may naturally, but rather I'm offering myself the self compassion because I hurt, because of the hurt that is there in the way I'm feeling it, and to offer some comfort and some soothing around that. So, self compassion and mindfulness work really beautifully together. They feel like two wings for me. It's like mindfulness kind of says to us, feel your suffering with spacious awareness. How that dropping into the physical sensation of whatever the hurt or the pain or the suffering may be, and having a little spaciousness, a little giving it a little air. And then self-compassion says, be kind to yourself when you suffer. So both our mindfulness and our self-compassion allow us ultimately, in my experience, to live with less resistance towards ourselves and what's happening in our experience, and ultimately less resistance towards our lives. Oh, so it feels like time to explore a self compassion practice. And the one I've chosen is a very foundational practice. It's often referred to as the self compassion break. So we're going to drop into practice, and it'll be about 15 to 20 minutes we'll practice for. So please take care of yourself in this practice. So know what's right for you, what you want to dip into, and what you want to dip out of. So I really trust you in knowing what's best for yourself through this practice. So let's take a few moments and find a really comfortable way to sit. So perhaps you want to shift from your current position and maybe give yourself a little more support with some cushions or another way of sitting. So taking that time to find a really comfy and relaxed upright position. And then just allowing the eyes to close or a soft downward gaze. And perhaps starting by taking a moment to appreciate yourself for creating this time and this space to show up here for yourself. And just allowing your attention to drop down into the body again. And coming into some relative stillness. And taking a few moments to see what wants to relax. So perhaps that's softening the face a little. And releasing the shoulders down. And letting go a little more. And then you might want to take a full deep in breath. So you're filling the chest and filling the lungs. And a slow out breath in your own time, feeling the sensations of the out breath as you release. And again, a deep in breath. And a slow out breath. And then letting your breath resume its natural rhythm. And opening the senses and being present to whatever is arising moment by moment. So aware of the sounds all around. And aware of body sensations. And then the thoughts that are coming and going. And the overall emotional tone. And as you're settling in, allowing yourself to be fully present to the sensations of breathing. Attention on the inhalation and the exhalation, and that space in between. And knowing that throughout this practice, you can return to the breath whenever you wish. And now bringing to mind some real situation in your life that's causing some emotional struggle or some stress. So maybe that's a relationship issue, something related to work, perhaps, or a health issue. And perhaps not choosing a situation that feels overwhelmingly difficult at the moment. We want to take baby steps as we're learning this practice, yet finding a situation that's difficult enough that it is causing you some struggle. It has a bite to it. And taking a few moments now to really feel into the situation, bringing it vividly to mind and making it as real as possible. Maybe it's something like who said what to who, or what you're afraid of that might happen, or what did happen. So bringing the specifics of the situation to mind as best you can right now. And now I invite you to find a physical gesture of kindness towards yourself. So maybe that's placing a hand over the area of the chest, over your heart, or it might be placing a hand on the belly, wherever it feels most natural to yourself. Some gesture that feels as if it's offering kindness and support. And now I'm going to be saying a series of phrases, and I invite you to just let the phrases drop into your awareness Or you may choose to say them silently to yourself. Oh, well, offering this gesture of comfort to yourself, this physical touch. And the first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering. And turning towards and acknowledging the suffering that is present right now in you. And maybe using language that really speaks to you. Maybe something like, this is really hard right now. Or this is really challenging what I'm going through. Whatever language helps you acknowledge that suffering, that some sort of pain, some sort of challenge is present. So this is a moment of suffering. And the second phrase is, suffering is a part of life. And with this phrase, we're reminding ourselves of our common humanity. We're remembering that suffering is normal and it's not wrong to feel this way. So, again, using language that speaks to you in a way that you can take it in. So, maybe something like, I'm not alone in feeling this way. Or it's normal to struggle in this way. So, suffering is a part of life. And the third and final component is bringing in some kindness. So, bringing in a wish for ourselves. And we can start by asking ourselves, what do I need right now? What do I need right now? And something may bubble up right away or not. And maybe what we need is to wish ourselves, may I be patient with myself. Or may I accept myself just as I am. Or may I be safe. May I be at ease. May I be happy. So just allowing yourself any words of kindness and support that you need to hear right now. And remembering that for many of us, this practice of self compassion may not come naturally. It's not a problem. So you may not be feeling a shift and maybe even feeling a little more agitated or frustrated. It's no right or wrong with this one. So knowing that ultimately this practice is about accepting ourselves exactly as we are, whatever we're feeling right now. As best we can, relating to ourselves with kindness and warmth because we're hurting. And now returning your attention to the sensations of breathing in the body. Noticing each breath as it enters and leaves your body. Each breath offering yourself some warmth and some kindness. Allowing the breath to soothe and comfort you. And knowing that our practice will come to an end in a few moments. And resting in the feelings of kindness you may have generated for yourself as best you can. And when you're feeling ready, and there's no hurry, just allowing your eyes to softly open. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm confident we probably all experience that in quite different ways. However, your experience was, I'm hoping it was helpful in some way. So that practice was a longer version of the self-compassion break. You can also do this practice on the spot, kind of anywhere, anytime, which is important because in life, those little ouches or even those big hurts, they can catch us unaware during the day, and we need to have a practical practice we can turn to in that moment. So I wanted to share with you that more practical practice, kind of the very shortened version of what we just experienced. And as you probably noticed, the very first step is to actually notice that we're suffering. And of course, our suffering takes many different forms. We might be feeling stressed or anxious or sad, angry, blaming, frustrated, hurt, disappointed. The important thing is that we actually notice we're feeling this way, which is no small thing. It really isn't. And in fact, that was the trickiest part for me, just noticing in the moment that things were hard, that there was something painful. There was anxiety or stress or blame or hurt, and pausing in that. So that was really tricky for me to remember to do and to really bring it into my life in a more habitual way. Because I realized I had grown so used to just kind of brushing off my stress, kind of just deflecting my hurt into blame or shutting down my anger, that I wouldn't acknowledge that I was hurt in the first place. So, really using very defensive strategies and just not noticing the hurt and pausing. So, that's the first step, noticing your suffering. So, we're going to do this together, this shortened practice. You can choose to join us. So, in this moment, just finding that gesture again, that physical gesture of comfort. And for me, that's a hand on my chest, my heart, or for others, it can be the belly or the face. And just noticing your suffering in whatever way it's showing up right now. And perhaps closing your eyes helps you get in touch with this more or not. And just feeling the warmth of your hand and the gentle contact it's making. And turning towards whatever that stress might be, that sadness or disappointment or hurt, whatever is here, and feeling it fully in the body, just locating it as a body sensation. And saying to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. And then recognizing that suffering is a part of life. So this is a moment of suffering, reminding ourselves suffering is a part of life. And may I be kind to myself. And we can also ask the question, what do I need to hear right now to express some kindness to myself? So it's really as simple as that. A gesture, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life, and may I be kind to myself. Now, those tend to be my words. It's really important to find your own words. So, in recognizing the suffering, maybe it's this hurts, or ouch, or this is really hard right now. In remembering we're part of the human race and suffering is a part of life, we might say to ourselves, other people also feel this way. Or perhaps I'm not alone. Life is difficult for all of us. And then we can also personalize those words, our wish for ourselves, the third component. So may I learn to accept myself as I am, or may I be strong? May I be patient? May I forgive myself? Whatever it is we need in that moment. So, an important part of this practice is this physical touch. And the reason for that is that evolution has programmed all of us to be really responsive to warmth, physical warmth, and to soothing touch and to gentle vocalizations. And what actually happens physiologically in us is that warmth and soothing touch, they switch on our soothing system, which helps the whole body calm down. It helps us get out of our threat system. And we feel calm and we feel comforted. So finding that soothing touch is really important just to give ourselves a chance to come into the body. Offers us that space to be a little more responsive and not so reactive. So I thought we'd just mess around a little bit and find for each of us what that soothing touch is. So let's experiment by trying all the different sort of positions. We may already sense that we know the best place, but it's fun to kind of play around with this too. So let's begin by that simple place of placing the hand on the chest. And then you might even want to take the second hand and placing it on top of that and just feeling into what that's like for you. So the weight and the warmth of the hands, perhaps feeling the movement of the breath underneath. And just noticing what this particular gesture is like for you. Now let's place one hand on the belly and feeling the warmth it offers down in the belly. And let's experiment with two hands. So placing that second hand on top. And just noticing what this kind of touch is offering you. Bringing the warmth and that contact down into the belly. And again, perhaps feeling the sensations of movement in the belly under the hands. And another gesture can be kind of cupping our cheeks. So this feels familiar somehow from childhood for me. We're just offering that warmth and that touch, kind of cradling our face with our hands. And I notice a little more contact here, skin to skin. So just feeling into this gesture and what it offers you. And finally, another gesture is to hug ourselves, quite literally. So just sort of wrapping our arms around. And this can often provide a little bit of containment, also warmth and contact. So just noticing what it's like for you. And just releasing that gesture. And you may find other ones. Some people find holding their hand, because some of these more sort of discreet gestures or holding their forearm, we can use in situations where perhaps we're not so comfortable placing a hand on the heart or our hands on our face. So, really kind of play around with the different soothing gestures that work for you or work in different situations for you as well. So, I hope you found one that felt easeful, felt quite natural for you. So, what we're finding, I hope, is that instead of naturally kind of activating our threat system when our humanness shows up, meaning whenever we kind of feel anxious or we fall into sadness or frustration, we can offer this soothing touch, and we can offer self-compassion to switch on that soothing system that really helps us ground and calm the body so that we can have a more responsive and a more ideally kind and warm approach to ourselves and ultimately to others. So, just to recap that gesture, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life, and may I be kind to myself. And you will find your own words for that. I'm quite confident. So, kind of in summary, what I've come to learn is that self compassion at its most basic level simply means really just simply means being with myself and offering myself the same kind of kindness and understanding that I would with a friend. So really, being on my own side, the way I am with my friends. So coming from this friendlier and warmer place really does allow me to shift my unhelpful ways more effectively. It helps me bring about the change I want, especially in my behavior, I notice. Whereas berating myself, as I can so readily do and have in the past in particular, seems to really keep me kind of stuck in whatever it is that's not serving me. Somehow that just beating myself up and that continual criticism, it doesn't work. I mean, I think I've always believed that it does, and it's moved me a little bit. But the self compassion is so much gentler and kinder, and it's moved me so much more in terms of allowing myself to bring about change in my life. So, when we treat ourselves as a dear friend, we're no longer totally absorbed in playing the role of who is suffering as well, which I find really interesting. So, yes, I'm hurting, but I can also feel care and concern for that one who's hurting. So, again, it provides a little bit of space, a little bit of distance. So, I am both the comforter and the one who needs comfort. So it really opens up this feeling of there is more to me than just this pain right now, because sometimes it can feel like that it's all that exists. So there is more to me than just this pain right now. I also have this heartfelt response to the pain. So the other key thing I've learned practicing self-compassion is that having self-compassion for myself means I'm really honoring my humanness. So when things don't go my way, which is very frequent, um, whenever I encounter my frustration and experience loss and make mistakes and bump up against all my limits and fall short of my ideals, we all do it. And reminding myself of that this is just simply what it is to be human, that this is this human condition. And it's a reality that is shared by all of us. That reminder never gets old. So the more we can open our hearts to this reality, this human life, it's not always easy. So the more we can open our hearts to this reality instead of constantly fighting against it or feeling like we're the only ones who somehow suffer in this way, the more we're able to feel compassion for ourselves, certainly, but also to feel it for others. So, in a really kind of quick summary, what I would have to say about self-compassion is that giving yourself permission to treat yourself kindly, it and this is That's the key. It's just giving yourself permission, opening yourself up to being your own best friend. A little bit cliched, but it really is about being your own friend, being on your own side. And it's a myth that it's selfish or involves self pity or self indulgent to be kind to yourself. So remember that self compassion recognizes that shared human condition. So it's not about wallowing in our pain. We're simply acknowledging that life is difficult for everyone. And we also know that when we fill up our own cup, we have more to give to others. And self compassion is a way of supporting and nourishing ourselves so that we can really reach our own full potential. We can be successful in our lives, however we define that success for ourselves. So I wanted to share some words from the teacher at Pema Chodron. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with her. Very wise Buddhist teacher. And these are some words that she offers on self compassion. Comes from a beautiful book called Comfortable with Uncertainty. And this is what she says. She says, start where you are again and again. You might think that there are no others on the planet who dislike themselves as much as you do. What you do for yourself, any gesture of kindness, any gesture of gentleness, any gesture of honesty and clear seeing towards yourself will affect how you experience your world. What you do for yourself, you're doing for others. And I think that is just such a beautiful motivation for practicing self compassion, along with all the wonderful research we have. So I'm just checking time. We've got about 10 minutes. And I would love to have some interaction. It's a very challenging sort of medium to work in, feeling quite one sided. So I'm really open to questions, which would require unmuting your mic, wherever that might be on your screen, or if you wanted to just do a chat. So I'm just going to go into the chat. So far, just some lovely hellos. But yes, any questions?
It's David. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's certainly come at a very timely moment for me when I'm going through a lot of self-recrimination and self-criticism in the wake of having ended a relationship. So
Hmm.
I think the practice it's already been helpful, and I hope will continue to be helpful in allowing me to be a little more self-accepting. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hmm. May you find the soothing and comfort from the practice that you need right now, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for those words. Hmm.
I also wanted to say that the task of turning off the self-criticism microphone and the lack of self-acceptance, I suspect, is quite a difficult task, which won't come overnight.
Mm. Mm. It's a if you're anything like me, it's a well-worn groove, the pathway in the brain, if you like. Um, and ultimately, I've come to know it's there to protect and provide some safety, but in a very unskillful way. So when I can kind of notice when it's there, which is the first trick, of course, and then kind of acknowledge it's there for, it has its purposes, it's just very unskillful. Um, Rather than in the past, I've sort of just tried to push that voice away, just kind of reject it in some way. But I found when I can accept all of it. But as you say, it takes practice. It just takes time with all of this, shifting our relationship with ourselves. Because, like you and me, we've spent many years relating to ourselves in a particular way. So those are really well worn grooves. And yeah, just practice and one of the challenges I had in the early days was when I noticed I didn't practice, when I allowed that critical, judgmental voice to again have it say and impact me. I judge that. So,
Indeed. Thanks once
mm,
again.
thank you, David. I'm going to go to the chat because there's a few questions there. Ah, Fiona, how beautiful. She says, thank you for that. Is it strange that I've had tears through this session? No, that's very, very, very common. In my experience, it's, coming closer to ourselves, and it's a very intimate and vulnerable experience, and tears are very natural. Yeah. And sorry, I don't know the first name, but the question is, if self-compassion is very challenging, would it benefit from an established mindfulness? I'm thinking of doing MBSR, but I think this is really the direction I want to go. Oh, that's such a good question. Um, my experience was, as I mentioned earlier, was coming to mindfulness through MBSR, and that gave me a strong foundation for being able to just even notice when I was in pain, and then making that choice to come to myself with some more kindness and some soothing. So I found it very helpful to have that underpinning of mindfulness, that ability to have the self-awareness and to then make that choice, that responsive choice, rather than that reactive defense. And I will also add, in the teaching of MBSR, inherently is a teaching of self compassion. Perhaps not so overtly with the words, but in the guiding of the practices and the overall holding of MBSR and mindfulness is we're encouraged to bring a curious, warm, friendly attitude to whatever is showing up, which for many of us is a huge shift, just to be curious about what's showing up, to bring a little bit of friendliness. So that self-compassion is in the MBSR program itself. So yeah, I'd really encourage that route. And of course there's programs where mindfulness, self-compassion, moving right into that, although just a caution, and this is a personal opinion, it's not based on anything other than that. I do kind of question the ability to um, shift our relationship with ourselves without a foundation of mindfulness and self-awareness, ability to notice and find the space to, as I was saying before, respond rather than react in the usual way. So yeah, good luck with that. I hope you find an MBSR class somewhere soon. Lisa, this has helped me to understand it shows strength to practice self-compassion. It's not a weakness. How beautiful. And it is strength, and it's not an easy practice. You'll notice it's not for the faint of heart. Self-compassion, it's a challenging practice, but absolutely it is a practice of strength. And David, thank you. Another big challenge is not just self-acceptance, but also being afraid to show a side of ourselves that we don't feel so comfortable with to others, and then not to feel bad about that. Absolutely. So perhaps you're speaking to just being more vulnerable with others. So speaking more about how we're feeling. Um, it's risky. It's not, yeah, it's risky. And we can never know how others will respond. Of course, I think what's helped me be increasingly vulnerable with others, intimate with others. I don't mean just an intimate partner per se, but just more intimate in my relationships by sharing more of myself emotionally, is that regardless of how that may be received, I know that I can soothe and comfort myself, that I don't have to find it outside of myself. So it's really allowed me to, yeah, take more risk in being vulnerable with my emotional life. Mm. Um, Thank you for the response. I struggle with having any connection to my feelings. Yeah, very, very common with the PTSD, struggling to connect with feelings, really understandable. So, yeah, I would even then reinforce the recommendation to start with the mindfulness practice, because it's a practice that eases us into our feelings through our body, which can often be a safer place. for some and not for others, but you'll have a skilled teacher um, and an Openground MBSR program who can really help you with that. And I've got 2 more minutes. Anyone else has a question or a chat? Hmm. I like the idea of being able to do the practice as a mini. Yes, the mini it's a lifesaver. And I've done even like mini. So sometimes I could just do this and it just reminds me, to drop back inside and to take a breath and take a pause. And yeah, yeah, you'll find your way with all of that. I'm quite confident. Well, oh, time is up. It goes so quickly, doesn't it? And I really wish we could have had more interaction in the way we're kind of limited with this medium, but at the same time, it's given us a chance to come together in this way. So I'm appreciative of it. So thank you, everyone. I wish you all the best with your experiments, explorations, and practices of self compassion. Go well.